Eh, Good morning, everyone. This is the second series of conversation of the next week U.S. elections, organized by the Columbia Global Center in Santiago and the Center for International Studies of the Catholic University. In this second event, we will discuss the current state and eventual impact of the results of the U.S. relationship with the Middle East. The conference will be co-moderated by Karen Poniasic and me. Today, our distinguished guest is Ambassador Joseph Westphal, who is professor at the Lauder Institute of Management and International Studies at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He's also senior fellow at the Center for Leadership and Change Management a non-resident fellow at the International Study Center of the Catholic University, CUC. Ambassador Westphal has had a long and distinguished career in government and academia. He was the US ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from 2014 to 2017. Prior to this appointment, Ambassador Westphal was the Undersecretary of the Army of the United States government. In government, Ambassador Westphal worked in both the House and Senate for more than 12 years. He has held positions in the administration of Presidents Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Obama. Ambassador Westphal, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you very much, Karen and Columbia and the Catholic University for this. This discussion is very important because I can tell you from my own personal experience that when I was in the Pentagon as the Secretary of the Army in the first term of the Obama administration, the president proposed what we called a pivot to Asia. That is to have a greater focus of our attention and our activities into Asia because of the growth and the power of China. For us in the Pentagon, this made a lot of sense. However, we understood that the Middle East would continue to draw us deeper and deeper into problems that affected our own security, the security of the region, of course, and the security of the world, from Afghanistan to Egypt, and also including North Africa, which we don't consider the Middle East, were areas where we were constantly engaged, the growth of ISIS and so on. So we in the Pentagon were very concerned about how do we do this pivot? How do we focus on Asia when we've got this area that continues to be a problem? I think in the coming years, in the coming decade, the Middle East will continue to be a really, really important region for the United States. And while we are pivoting more and more to Asia, we are still deeply entrenched in dealing with the issues of the Middle East. And you see it in this election, in the debates between the two candidates and the members of Congress who are running for re-election about what we should do with respect to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and our overall relations in the Middle East. To frame this conversation, I would like to, if you forgive me for reading something, I'd like to read you two excerpts from two speeches, one from Trump and one from Biden, that I think you all know the major difference between the two candidates. But early on in 2017, the year after he was elected president, President Trump went to the United Nations to the meeting of the General Assembly. And in his speech, he said the following. He said, "Our success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty and promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and for the world. We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government. We do not expect all nations to uphold these two core sovereign duties, to respect the interests of, we do expect all nations to uphold these two core sovereign duty to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation. This is the beautiful vision of the institution, and this is the foundations for cooperations and success. Strong sovereign nations let diverse countries with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect. And in 2019, to the General Assembly of the UN, he says, the future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the difference that makes each country special and unique. Clearly what he is saying is, it is not our job to be involved in all the activities, internal affairs of other countries. We need to respect their sovereignty. They need to respect our sovereignty. And, you know, the old Make America Great Again, the whole concept of his administration has been just that. Biden, on the other hand, here's an excerpt from his remarks at the World Economic Forum. It is my hope and expectations that the next president and vice president and our leaders in Congress will ensure that the United States continues to fulfill our historic responsibilities as the indispensable nation. But we have never been able to lead alone, not after World War II, not during the depth of the Cold War, and not today. It is only by championing the liberal international order, by continuing to invest in our security, reaffirming our shared values, and expanding the cause of liberty around the world, that we will retain our position of leadership. Because if we don't fight for our values, no one else will. And he said, you know, just recently, he said, the first thing that I'm going to do, if elected president, is to get on the phone with all the heads of state and say, America is back and you can count on us. So two completely different views of the role of the United States in the world and the importance of sovereignty on one hand and globalization and multilateral leadership on the other. And you know, I'll end with a few points to differentiate these two candidates. Trump has pretty much stayed true to his philosophy of only prioritizing U.S. interests and not meddling in the Middle East countries' internal affairs. He wants to reduce U.S. troops in the region pretty dramatically. He has strongly supported Israel and has been able to persuade it, you know, at least two Arab countries, two Gulf countries, to begin the process of establishing, you know, diplomatic relations with Israel. He has proposed a new Middle East peace plan and taken a lot of actions to try to push that forward. He has confronted Iran. Obviously, one act that was pretty strong was the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Strong support for Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Vetoed congressional resolutions, two congressional resolutions, one that wanted to prohibit the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. This is after the Khashoggi killing. And the other one that wanted to seek an end to the war in Yemen. And the president vetoed both of those resolutions. Biden, on the other hand, supports keeping troops in the region. He is opposed to taking troops out of Syria and has felt that we have betrayed our friends and partners in fighting ISIS, the Kurds. He has his career been deeply involved in the Middle East and Middle East policy, both as a member of the Senate and as vice president. He has strong support for Israel, but his conditions are different than Trump's. He wants an end to Israel building settlements in the occupied territories, and has still remains strong for a two-state solution. He's been very critical of Saudi Arabia, dramatically critical of Saudi Arabia, and you know, his mantra and his whole philosophy is that he will He will really emphasize diplomacy. He says he will invest in the State Department significantly, and he will, one of his first things he'll do is to organize a summit for democracy. So two completely different outlooks and actions as to how you would approach issues, not just in the Middle East, but around the world. So this is an election that is significant. I mean, those two differences can tell you how this country has debated these issues for the last 4 years, between those who support the administration's actions around the world and those who see it as going in the wrong direction. It's one of the most fascinating elections. Our voting is skyrocketing, and we are awaiting some very significant events to take place in the next week or two. So Jorge, I'll stop there and let you proceed with questions or comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Westphal. I just forgot two things. First, the audience may ask by chat to Ambassador Westphal the issues you can ask to our guest. And secondly, that Ambassador Westphal was born in Chile in 1975, right?
I wish I was born in 1975.
No, sorry.
I was born in 1948, but I'll accept 1975.
You moved. Okay.
That's you, Jorge.
Yeah.
You were born in 1975.
That's when I was 6 years old.
Yes. Yeah. Move to Professor Westphal. I would like to start by quoting the New York Times article by Roger Cohen last week. He said the following, quote, "Among the words or phrases that were never spoken in the two presidential debates were Syria, human rights, Israel, Palestine, United Nations, terrorism, alliance, and so on. President Trump never mentioned Afghanistan. Joe Biden once. So the question is, to what extent U.S. foreign policy to Middle East has changed over the last decade, not only during Trump administration, but also the tendency from the past to now?"
Yeah, I think I read that article. I think it's very interesting because, as you know, elections are tactical operations, and so they don't really explain everything that will happen after the election or happened before. They are about the present time. We have not, thankfully, had an act of terrorism. We had one act in Florida where a Saudi airman who was training there killed some of our Air Force personnel. He was arrested and he's being tried. But we have not had to deal with, acts of terrorism as aggressively as we've had in the past. And so Americans, are also tired of these wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, tired of the engagement. And so I think this is a tactical effort on the part of the candidates to really not bring up something that the American people are just not focused on, not necessarily interested in at this point in time, because of the pandemic and because of the economy. That's the center issue. So to bring up Afghanistan, for example, given the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people unemployed, that we've got shutdowns everywhere, we've got hospitals full of patients suffering from COVID, and you're talking about Afghanistan or Syria, it's just too remote for what we're going through right now.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Karin?
Yes, Ambassador, thank you very much. I have a few questions picking up on what you mentioned. Trump, when he announced the agreement between Sudan and Israel, he was very hyperbolic about this Abraham Accords being the one of the main successes in terms of his foreign policy. He said there are more and more to come. We will see. The issue is two-sided. This created resentment among many actors in the Middle East, including Palestinian leadership. And on the other side, and this is a criticism to Israel, I mean, it was understood that these Abraham Accords would mean an end to Netanyahu's preposterous plan to annex occupied territories. But Israel continues building settlements in the occupied territories. And I think, and your thoughts on it, it's a fallacy to insist that Abraham Accords would stop annexation, because de facto, by building settlements, annexation continues. What's your take on this? The microphone.
Okay, sorry about that. The sad situation is that, and we knew this in the when I was ambassador in Saudi Arabia. In fact, we brought it to the attention of the Saudis, myself and Secretary Kerry, who was the Secretary of State at the time, that the concept of a two-state solution was becoming less and less possible, given what the Israelis were doing with the annexation, with the settlements and where the settlements were, because it would mean that you'd have to, basically undo a huge amount of that, and that was not going to be possible for any Israeli government to do, regardless of what their politics was. So it was becoming more and more difficult to move towards a two-state solution in Palestine. And we were very, very concerned about it. And of course, the relationships with Netanyahu at the time between President Obama and Netanyahu were not positive, were not easy. I don't think this country, I don't think any administration, whether it's Obama administration, Bush, or any of the ones that I've served on, and certainly not the Trump administration, has ever been weak on support for Israel. There was no question about our support for Israel, but we wanted to be able to achieve some kind of long-lasting fairness in the way that we proceeded there. So that's one of the very difficult solutions. And I'll tell you a story. When I was ambassador, typically an ambassador, when he leaves the country, he meets with the foreign minister and pays respect to a few ministers, etc. In my case, I had built a great relationship with King Salman because he had been the crown prince when I first came to the country under King Abdullah. And we had a very, very close personal relationship, the king and I, as well as a very close relationship I had with his son, Mohammed bin Salman, who was the Minister of Defense at that time as well, and the deputy crown prince, and the crown prince with Mohammed Nayef. So as I was leaving the country, the king asked to see me and say farewell. And I was very honored by that. And I went to see him. And he said to me, Ambassador, I have two things I'd like to do. One is I'd like to give you a message, for you to give a message to President Obama. So this was in late January, just before the inauguration of President Trump. He said, I'd like you to tell President Obama that I want to thank him for his leadership. I want to wish him the very best in whatever his endeavors are afterwards, and thank him for his friendship. And I said, I will do that, Your Majesty. And then he asked me, he said, I'd like you to also give a message to President-elect Trump. And he said, I want you to tell him that, for me, that we believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist. That we believe that Islam and Christianity emanated from Judaism. And we want to recognize that fully, the fact of how we are connected. And I'd like you to tell President-elect Trump that I want to work with him but it is really, really important that he work towards a solution of the Israeli-Palestinian issue and to go forward with a two-state solution. And that is very important to us. Now, I say that because the king is of a generation that fought for that, and has been fighting in support of the Palestinians for a long, long time, for all of his life. And but the generation of his son, the current essential leader of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, that's not where they come from. The Palestinian issue is not center and full front and center for them. Relations with Israel are important for a lot of reasons. They're a military power, they're an economic power. They're important in the region, and they're also important to peace and tranquility. So their approach to this issue is different. And in this deal, which is President Trump has been able to get a few countries to have diplomatic relations with Israel, I think it's very, very important. I think it's very positive. Now, what we don't know from these deals is what's behind the deal, what's been promised. What does Khalifa or Zayed, Khalifa in Bahrain, or Khalifa or Zayed in the UAE, what are they getting from both the U.S. and Israel, but mostly from the U.S. To establish these diplomatic relations? When this first came out, they were calling it here that these were peace plans, peace declarations. Well, these countries have never been at war. There wasn't a war between the UAE and Israel. There was just no diplomatic relations. So I don't subscribe to calling them peace agreements. They're essentially a decision to begin diplomatic relationship and a dialogue. Now, Saudi Arabia will want a lot of different things if they're going to sign something like this under Mohammed bin Salman. But the father is still there. And despite what people think, that he's too old, that he's too senile, that he's, yes, he's not running the country, but he is still the power. And and I can tell you from my many conversations with him, he feels strongly about this. So this is going to be an issue for the next administration, whether it's Trump or Biden, to have to deal with this in terms of getting other support from countries, major countries like Saudi Arabia.
Go on the question. Let's pick up. So the two-state solution, it seems dead for the moment. It can eventually revive. And that puts it in the same line, whatever happened with the deal of the century. They talked so much at the beginning of Trump's presidency about Kushner's plan to broker peace between Israel and Palestine, but that was a huge failure, right? I mean, how do you see? I mean, is there any possibility of having two states anytime soon?
I think it's going to be very difficult, and I think that President Biden, he has already said that he will try to work closely with Israel to stop the building of new settlements in the occupied territories, and he will try to work towards that. But that will depend largely on also who's leading who's governing in Israel, and what kind of pressure the other Arab countries can put on this, given now that they do have diplomatic relationships and they can have a voice in all this. So I think we just have to wait and see what's going to happen. Under Trump, I think they'll continue to move this way. Now, Biden, for example, has supported moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and so he has seen some positive signs out of this agreement, out of this plan, so to speak. But a lot remains to be seen yet.
Jorge.
Thank you. Joseph, I wanted to move to the big players in the Middle East. You have mentioned Saudi Arabia, but also Iran. So my question is, what is the role that the big players are playing in the Middle East and its eventual impact in the US foreign policy, Iran, Saudi Arabia?
Well, we don't need to get into the long historic rivalry between the Persians and the Arabs, and the Persians have had the advantage in a way, given that they are a much more ancient society. They were a conquering nation. They have competed very aggressively for dominance in the region. They, of course, are divided between Shia and Sunni. Saudi Arabia claims, of course, primacy because it is the seat of Islam, the birthplace of Muhammad. The king is the custodian of the two holy mosques, and the whole world recognizes that, the whole Muslim world. And so there is this rivalry, not only in the region, but around the world, for who is the voice of Islam, what are how do you move forward? Iran has also chosen to be extremely active in the region, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, with Hezbollah, in Yemen, in support of the Houthis. So, people say all the time, the press always says, that the Saudis were very opposed to the peace agreement, the nuclear agreement with Iran. Well, I was there as ambassador. They were not opposed to it from the standpoint of, and I can tell you, both Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman told me directly, we agree with this. We don't want an Iran with nuclear weapons right across the Arabian Gulf. We don't want a country of that. Even if they don't attack anybody, if they have an accident, we're going to be the fallout of that problem. So we applaud a negotiation, but we want you to put in that negotiation every effort to get them to get out of Iraq, to stop supporting Assad in Syria, stop supporting the Houthis who are firing missiles into our country. That's what we want you to do. And I wasn't a part of those negotiations. So all I could do is talk to Kerry and to the president, and I mentioned it many times to both of them. And I got a very clear message that they were not going to go in that direction. They felt that the Iranians would walk away if we brought up all these issues, and therefore, in order to get an agreement, they had to just focus on the nuclear peace. And that is what angered Saudi Arabia and many of the other countries in the region. We didn't hold them accountable. And what you have today, you have Iran attacking Aramco facilities in Saudi Arabia. And despite Trump's very strong support of Saudi Arabia, we don't have any treaties with them. We're not really allies. We are partners. There was nothing done. They have consistently harassed shipping in the Gulf. They have threatened all kinds of things. The Iranians have. So it's this immense competition that exists between these two powers. The other thing that really angered them towards the United States and the Obama administration, and Biden's will have the fallout of this, is it's something that it's two things happened in 1979, if you recall. One was the Iranian Revolution, and the other was the takeover of the Holy Mosque by this preacher Yumanji and a large group of men who were felt that the Sauds were basically too liberal, and that they were you know, they were moving away from the strict Muslim ethics. So because back in those days, before the Iranian Revolution, Saudi Arabia was a completely different country. I mean, women didn't all cover. I mean, it was a very much more liberal society. And so the Sauds just became very afraid of these two events, you know, the effect of the Iranian Revolution and the takeover of the mosque, which took them weeks to be able to expel these terrorists from the mosque. It frightened them, and they just ratcheted up the conservatism and started spreading it around the world too, being supporters of the Wahhabi very conservative teachings. So these events have polarized the region. And then the one last thing I'll say is that when President Obama had a very famous interview with the Atlantic magazine, a very long interview in which he talked about all his philosophy of governing and governance in the world and so on. And in that interview, he speaks to this by saying, you know, that the Iran and Saudi Arabia need to share he used the word share the region, that they're the two large countries, that they should be able to share and work together. And, you know, he was, in some ways, there was some naivety in this, in that these countries were not necessarily willing to share anything. They were fighting for dominance. And so when the Saudis saw that article, in fact, the king brought it up at one of his meetings with President Obama and really chastised him for saying this, you know. So President, you know, if there's a President Biden, he's going to have to contend with this. This relationship is not going to go, it's not going to become any different than what it's been. It's going to be very conflictual.
Okay, Ambassador, I'll pick up on another country that seeks dominance in the region, which is Turkey. Huge actor, which is European on one hand, but also a very important actor in the Middle East. They're having issues with France and Greece right now, but it's involved in they were involved in the civil war in Libya. They're involved in Syria. They have feuds with United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And they decided to influence the Israeli-Palestine conflict by inviting the Hamas leaders recently. So where is Turkey in this whole chess board?
Well, I think Turkey is becoming much more of a player. You know, we always see Turkey as a European country. They were about to become part of the European community and, you know, NATO and all of that. But I think where they want to play is in the whole region. And that means that they are in direct competition, in my view, with Saudi Arabia for who is really the dominant voice for Islam around the world. And I think you're seeing parts of that emerge today. Their involvement, like you said, in North Africa, their relations with Russia, vis-a-vis Syria. So it's you know, that was the original caliphate was there, and I think they want to in some ways restore that role around the world, and the Saudis just are not going to have any of that. So I think the next administration. I don't know why my thing keeps getting muted. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
I don't know what you missed.
A few seconds.
Okay. So anyway, I think the next administration is going to have a lot to contend with these two rival powers. Relations with Turkey right now are tenuous. Trump likes Erdogan, but he likes him because he's a strong man. And you got to take Trump seriously. He believes the idea that the United States is no longer the policeman of the world. Whatever the Turks do in their own homeland, in their own country, is their business. We're not going to interfere. So that pleases people like Erdogan. On the other hand, when we see some of the things that are happening in the region and their engagement, and we see what the Russians are doing, there should be a lot of cause for concern for us.
Thank you, Joseph. We have many questions for the audience, but first, I was wondering what happens with ISIS. A few years ago, ISIS was a sort of hot topic in the Middle East as one of the most important threats in the region. But for example, President Trump has said that they are defeat ISIS. But since your knowledge of the region, what happens with ISIS as a terrorist organization?
Right. Well, ISIS is alive and well, unfortunately. It is just not the organized, they call themselves a caliphate, in Syria, in part of Iraq, that they were before. They didn't hold territory. So we've taken and disrupted all of that for them. We've imprisoned many of them. There are thousands of ISIS, and I call them terrorists, in prisons right now in Syria. And I'm very afraid that nobody wants to take charge of those prisons, and that those people will actually be freed to go out and they're very committed to their cause. So it's like a virus. It's spreading around the world. It's in North Africa. We have lots of problems with ISIS in Afghanistan, and you'll see them around the world. And I haven't read the detailed stories of what these incidents that have happened in France in the last 36 hours. But I wouldn't doubt that those individuals are influenced by ISIS. In Saudi Arabia, when I was there, I'll tell you a story. I was sitting in my office one day as ambassador, and my staff came in, my security people came in, and they had an iPad. And they said, we have to show you something, Mr. Ambassador. And in this iPad was a picture of me that was taken probably from the internet, of me giving a speech, which was when I was Secretary of the Army. And across the face of the speech, this picture, there was a message from ISIS in Syria saying, kill the ambassador of the US, cut off his head. And then the Saudis had found that, intercepted it, and intercepted messages. There was a whole plan to kill me. They even recruited a female to strap on a bomb, and the Saudis actually found this cell. So these were ISIS people in Syria sending messages to ISIS supporters in Saudi Arabia. And now what you have is those supporters are just everywhere. They're just not organized the same way. So I think there's still a very big danger there.
I have a question, Ambassador, here. It's a general question about, one second. I have so many questions that from Jaime Delgado. Generally, how do you think a probable government or an eventual government of Biden may recover the image of the U.S. abroad, which has severely damaged being severely damaged by the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think that you know he recognizes this concern, this issue, because there have been a lot of comments made by some European leaders, for example, that even a Biden administration will not restore the U.S.'s credibility anymore, not because the leader doesn't have credibility, but because the American people have supported very strongly the activities of Donald Trump, or the thinking of Donald Trump, that we are a divided nation, so we're not fully behind this effort. So I think it'll take time. I think he's already said, as I mentioned it early on in my remarks, he's talked about organizing a summit for democracy. He says he's going to invite world leaders. He's going to immediately start calling all the major world leaders to try to get support for organizing this summit, but also to begin a new effort to build a partnership again. He certainly will support NATO. He certainly will support UN organizations, the World Trade Organization. He wants a different kind of. He doesn't give China. He doesn't forgive China for all it does and has done, but he says we have to continue to negotiate with them. We have to continue to work hard to press our issues with them, investigate things when we need to, and he will try to get back into the agreement that President Obama proposed, the TPP, that he's strongly in support of that. He recognizes, talking about Latin America, for example, he recognizes the influence that agreement would have. And he wants to also restore US trade with Latin America. He's talked about a major effort to support what some people call, he hasn't called it this, some people call it a Marshall Plan for Central America. What people don't recognize is that Biden has spent a lot of time in Central America. As vice president, he made 16 visits to South America, to Latin America, and many of those were to Central America. And his commitment to work with what we call the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, is really crucial. And of course, it's in our national interest to do that as well. So I think it will take some time. I think eventually, he will restore that. But there's a lot of populism around the world, and European countries are suffering the politics of that as well. A lot of nationalism. In South America, you have it. In Brazil, you have it. In Colombia, you have it. In many places in Latin America as well. So, it's not going to be easy. But I think he will move towards that aggressively. I think President Trump will change his way of operating a little bit, because he's no longer going to be running for re-election as president. That's over with. He made it very clear when he got elected, I'm going to fulfill my promises, and he's been checking off every one of them. He does it, and I have to give him credit. He's been very amazing about achieving those promises that he made, or a lot of them. And they're easy promises when you just write an executive order, you sign it, and you hold it up. See, I fulfilled my promise. But that doesn't have the power of law. It still has to be approved by Congress. It still has to be enforced by governors and so on. So, not that he has achieved the things he promised, but he has actually acted on them. I think in the next Trump administration, he is going to be more concerned about his legacy. He is a man, you could say, that has an ego. We all have egos. He's got a pretty big ego. And I think he will be very interested in how he will be seen as a president in the future. And so he may tone down some of his way of thinking a little bit in order to achieve a different kind of legacy.
Thank you, Joseph. Going back to the formal relationships between Israel, United Emirates, José Tomás Weiner asked the following: how could the recent US policy of promoting the establishment of formal relationships between Israel and Arab countries be affected in the case of Biden administration? You referred on that, but if you can deepen on this topic.
Yeah, no, I think he will be very supportive of that. I mean, it really reduces the tension. It creates opportunities for a greater understanding between the Arab nations and Israel. It certainly reduces the tensions for Israel, and it hopefully allows Israel to become more focused on both its internal development and growth, and not be constantly worried about military and aggressiveness on the part of its neighbors. I do think that there are deals that are being cut that I am not aware of what they are. I did hear, for example, that the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, may be getting the F-35. This is an airplane that the Saudis covet very much. We have a situation where we would sell certain things to Israel that we would not sell to neighboring countries because of potential conflicts. So that may ease that ability to do that they can now get things that they weren't able to get before. But that confronts our own internal policies of how much armaments we want to be selling to these countries. That's an issue that Congress and the president will have, the next president will have to deal with. So I don't know what's behind these deals. What we promised, the UAE and Bahrain, and now Sudan. Sudan, for example, is going to be taken off the terrorist list. It's going to, we're going to have a whole different approach to Sudan, and I don't know, Americans, I don't know how they'll react to that when it does happen. So we'll see how all these things go.
Ambassador, I want to double click on previous comments that you made. Do you think Biden will be as indulgent with Netanyahu, who knows, he will be there by the end of the year, hopefully not, and to Mohammed bin Salman as Trump has been?
Well, on Netanyahu, you got to deal with the leaders that are leaders of these countries. You can't ignore them. And if you have the philosophy of Biden and the approaches that he takes, he will deal with them, and he will work with them. It's in his DNA. It's just his personality. I worked very closely with him when I was Undersecretary of the Army and then Secretary, and he an ambassador, and he has that personality that he will be drawn to building a relationship with whoever he has to build it with. And so I think he will do that. The comments that he has made about Mohammed bin Salman, they were very, very tough comments, in which he said, he's a scourge he used a pariah. That's what he used, words like that. Not a scourge, a pariah. He said he will oppose the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. He will get tough on the war in Yemen, et cetera, et cetera. Now, when did he say these things? He said them when he was standing, excuse me, when he was standing in a debate with a number of other Democratic candidates, many of them progressive liberal Democrats who he was campaigning against. So he made those statements in that environment, in that situation. I don't think that once he's elected president, in fact, I know he won't, he will have to look at this differently. You can't ignore Saudi Arabia. You cannot say, well, they're pariah, I'm not going to I'm not going to deal with them. He has to deal with them. They are an important country. They're a really important. I mean, they are the seat of the Muslim world. Because of the two holy mosques and the custodian of the holy mosque. He can't ignore that importance of Saudi Arabia and the regional importance and the power that they hold. So he will deal with them, and he will build diplomacy, and he will, listen. When I left as ambassador in 2017 at the end of the Obama administration, literally days before Trump took over, it took 2 years, at least 2 years, for President Trump to name an ambassador to Saudi Arabia. And all the things that happened, soon after I left is when Mohammed bin Salman, basically he kicked his cousin out as crown prince, and he became crown prince. And all the activities that happened after I left. And I say that because I think having an ambassador who has the attention of the president and the confidence of the president in these important countries is critical. It's critical to managing a relationship. And a lot of these things would not have happened had Trump named an ambassador and that ambassador been active there. But there wasn't anybody there. And then Trump's philosophy of not interfering allowed them to do whatever they wanted to do without consequences from the United States. I think Biden will act differently in that regard. Look, I think there are at least 8 countries in Latin America that don't have an ambassador, including Chile.
In Chile. Right.
And these are, Honduras doesn't have an, Canada doesn't have an ambassador. These are important countries.
Joseph Neme asked the following question: how do you see the current start of Israeli-Lebanese negotiations on maritime border with the help of UN and US? Could that be the first step toward broader peace negotiations, including land borders? This is because some findings of oil and gas in the sea, and they're looking for exploring both countries.
Yeah, we were looking at that for a long time in the past, and not talking about it publicly. But I think that's a very positive step. Lebanon is it's a very tiny country, and it's been abused by everybody, from Syria to Israel to Iran and so on. In the United States, this poor little country is, in fact, at one time, I'll tell you, I was in a meeting with the president and the secretary of state because I was doing a lot of work as ambassador in Saudi Arabia in Lebanon, with Lebanon. And I said to the president, I said, you need to pay me 2 salaries because I'm doing more work in Lebanon than I am in Saudi Arabia. Obama doesn't have a sense of humor, so he didn't laugh. Kerry laughed. So basically, I think this is important, but I don't know much beyond what you just said. I just know that this has been going on. I just don't have any details of what's progressing here. But I would tend to think that both Trump and Biden would be very supportive of something like that.
Thank you, Joseph. Karen?
Yes, I was reading what's up, but I'm trying to double check. There was an earthquake in Turkey, for what I'm reading here. So our best wishes for Turkey and its people. Hopefully,
thank God it's not in Chile. But if it was, I guess I'd see you all moving
right
sideways.
So we send our best wishes for Turkey and their people. Hopefully there won't be casualties. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. Ambassador Westphal, we're delighted that you could join us today.
Thank you very much.
This is, as Jorge explained, part of a series on the U.S. relationship with different regions of the world. A few weeks ago, we talked about China. Today, we've had the luck and the honor to have you, Joseph, to give us a big picture of what would happen in the relationships with the U.S. and the Middle East. And we will have probably, after the elections at this point, an analysis on something you mentioned, which is Europe and the NATO and the future of NATO, which is also a big challenge in terms of U.S. policy. So thank you on my side, Jorge.
Thank you very much for joining us. Joseph is a good friend of the center as well, and the audience that always are participating in our